The Seven Devils Mining District is located northwest of Council. You can see here that it's about 24 miles as the crow flies from Council to Bear, and the mining district was located along in here, inside the Snake River in Idaho, south of the Seven Devils Mountains. Even though it's called the Seven Devils Mining District, it was actually south of the Seven Devils Mountains, not in the mountains. You can see here Cuprum is the only surviving town of the area. All the rest of them are ghost towns, or pretty much are completely gone. This district was primarily a copper producing area, although in the northern part of the district they did have gold mines, and I'll be explaining that. The reason there's copper here is because of plate tectonics, and what I mean by that is that the Earth's crust is composed of plates that float on the molten magma at the core. And these plates are constantly moving. They move even today. But 100 million years ago, there was a larger North American plate that was basically where part of Idaho and the rest of the country is, and this Pacific plate moved up from the southwest and crashed into the North American plate. Now this happened at about the rate that your fingernails grow, so it took a long time. But a couple of things happen when two plates collide. And one is that they just push into each other and push up mountain ranges and kind of mix things up. The other thing that happens, and what's happening now, is this Pacific plate is sliding under the North American plate and pushing up a little bit and causing a lot of friction right along where they meet. It's also releasing magma up into an area that I'll show you in a minute that runs north and south, and makes or has made a number of volcanoes and hot springs. This is what's happening today. The Pacific plate is sliding under the North American plate, and when the friction builds up right in here, it can sometimes catch and not release so that this can't slide anymore, and then when pressure builds up to the point where it can't hold anymore and it releases, it causes earthquakes. You can see this chain of mountains here. These are all extinct volcanoes. The most notable ones are Mount Mazama, which is Crater Lake now. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. Most of the rest of these are completely extinct. But along here there are also hot springs. You may notice, like Starkey Hot Springs, Zims, Last Chance, and along the Payette River there's a number. We are located right about here, and we're kind of on the border between where these two plates met, and it's not an exact line. There's a lot of mixed up stuff in here. I like to call the Seven Devils Mining District a rock salad, and the reason I say that is because when the plates collided, they just pushed into each other and mixed everything up, and then over the millions of years since then, things just got pushed and shoved and mixed and uplifted, and basalt flows came through. It just mixed everything up, and that's one of the reasons that copper mining in the Seven Devils Mining District was not successful, and I'll explain that in a minute. The reason there's copper in the Seven Devils is because those tropical islands that were part of that Pacific plate had limestone as part of their composition. Limestone is basically seashells that have decomposed and fallen to the bottom of the ocean and solidified into limestone. And there's a big deposit of limestone in this area right here, and it extends into Oregon to some extent. I'm not sure how far. It's called the Martin Bridge Limestone Formation, and what it is a great big Sometimes it's referred to as a wall of limestone underground, although it's not a solid wall. As far as I know, I think it's broken into chunks. But the reason there's copper in the Seven Devils mining district is because copper is formed when molten magma meets limestone. So however many eons ago, when the earth was forming and all this stuff was getting turned into a rock salad, some molten lava collided with limestone and copper was formed in this area right in here. There's a place called Lime Point that's kind of on the south end of the mining district. This is looking east. The Kleinschmidt grade, the part that everybody thinks of as the Kleinschmidt Road, comes up over the top of this ridge right here and goes along down to the Snake River over here. And when you're coming down the Kleinschmidt grade, you can look right over and see Lime Point pretty easily. It's just a place where limestone is sticking out of the ground, and it's called Lime Point. So copper was first discovered by Levi Allen in 1862. He and 12 other young men were hired to travel up the Snake River from the new town of Lewiston, which was nothing but a bunch of tents at the time. They were hired to go up the Snake to figure out if it was navigable, whether they could get a steamship up the Snake River. They actually already knew that this wasn't possible because the Wilson Price Hunt expedition had been through there, and it was pretty obvious that it wouldn't be suitable for steam navigation. But Levi Allen and his crew went up the Snake. This is a drone shot looking west down Copper Creek, which is a tributary of Deep Creek. This is Hell's Canyon in the background with the Wallowa Mountains just showing. Hell's Canyon Dam today is at the mouth of Deep Creek. When Levi Allen and his group came up the Snake River at the mouth of Deep Creek, they decided to stop and go across country, and they came up through here, and right here they discovered a deposit of very rich copper ore, and Levi Allen decided he was going to claim it, even though it was miles and miles from anywhere, and the people with him thought he was crazy. I wanted to show you a picture from sometime around 1900, I'm not sure. This is basically the same view as this, only this is a drone shot from up higher and a little farther away. There's a little branch of Copper Creek that goes right up through here, and Helena was right here. And you can see the buildings in this shot. Here's that little branch of Copper Creek. This is the Peacock Mine. Between the time that Levi Allen discovered copper in the Seven Devils mining district and the time when people were actually mining it, he discovered the copper in 1862, which was the second year of the Civil War, and it still had 3 more years basically to go. That, in combination with the Indian Wars that happened in the 1860s, pretty much kept people from actively mining in places that weren't necessarily very accessible. The exception was gold mines, places like Orfino, Florence, Warren, and the Boise Basin. By 1862, those were all discovered. In fact, when Levi Allen and his group went on east from the Peacock mine discovery, they stopped just short of the Boise Basin, and just maybe later that month, after they turned back, if they had gone further, they might have discovered one of the richest gold deposits in the whole United States. The Boise Basin became world famous for prolific amounts of gold that were mined out of there. So basically, mining was very limited as far as copper mining in the Seven Devils mining district until 1885, when Albert Kleinschmidt came over here from Helena, Montana. He was a very successful businessman over there. He had invested in copper mines there, and he was a construction guy. He and his brother had constructed some major roads and other construction projects, and he'd become quite wealthy. So he came over to the Seven Devils mining district and invested in several mines here. Initially, because there were no roads into the mines, He hired people to high grade some of the copper ore from the Blue Jacket mine and put it in burlap bags, and he had teams of men with mules and horses pack the ore out to the nearest wagon road. So here's the Blue Jacket mine. Here's Landor, which I'll be talking about soon. Basically, Cuprum and Landor were along Indian Creek, which runs into the Snake River down here. Kleinschmidt had the mules and horse trains pack the copper ore out to the end of the wagon road, which was a few miles north of Bear, along what is now the main road up north of Bear that goes up through here. And then they loaded it into wagons here, drove those wagons full of ore all the way to Weiser, where the bags of ore were loaded onto train cars. And this was only 2 years after the railroad had reached Weiser. It was still a 3-day trip with an ore wagon, with any kind of wagon actually, from this area to Weiser. It took about a day to get to Council, another 2 days to get to Weiser. So from Weiser, the ore was transported all the way to Anaconda, Montana, where it was smelted. And some of the ore, for reasons I don't understand, was taken all the way to England to be smelted. And Kleinschmidt actually made a small profit by doing this, even though he had to transport it so far. Here's a picture of the guys high grading the ore, and you can see in the background here there's burlap bags that they put the ore in. And that's the way they seemed to transport it, even when they were transporting it in wagons when a road reached the mines. You can see all the bags behind these guys here. This is Frenchy David, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. He was one of the first prospectors in the Seven Devils mining district. So Kleinschmidt decided that he needed a road to his mines, so he started 22 miles of road, starting at the Peacock mine, which was that first one that Levi Allen had discovered, and it went from an elevation above the Peacock of about 7,000 feet and went down some really steep country to 5,000 feet lower down to the Snake River. He had this done in 1890. Here's the road from the town of Helena, was right by the Peacock mine. I'll talk about Helena in a few minutes. The road went right where the modern road does, actually. It comes down to Cuprum, goes on down here, and this is the part of Kleinschmidt grade that everybody considers the Kleinschmidt road. So what he was going to do was send ore wagons down this road to the Snake River, where he would have a steamship waiting to take the ore onto a railroad. This is what the road looked like about 20 years after it was built. And I thought it was a really good illustration that the Kleinschmidt grade, you know, the part that goes down from Cuprum to the Snake River that everybody thinks of as the Kleinschmidt Road. When it was first built, it was really a narrow, treacherous, steep road with rocks in it. This is 20 years afterwards when the first car went over the Kleinschmidt grade. And these people are working to make it drivable for an automobile. You know, people think the Kleinschmidt grade is challenging now and scary, but you can see how narrow it was and how rough it was even 20 years after it was built. Over the years, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and maybe even into the 70s, that road was worked on, even rebuilt numerous times, widened and leveled and graded. And so today it really isn't a bad road. It just has some pretty bad drop-offs that intimidate people. So here's the steamship that Kleinschmidt had built that he was going to transport the ore with once it reached the bottom of the Kleinschmidt grade. The plan was that this ship was to take the ore up the Snake River, not very far, to where it would be unloaded at the railroad at Huntington, Oregon. But it turns out that the ship was a little too tall to make it under one of the railroad bridges. Plus, the river was a little too shallow for this big a ship to make it up the river. So that plan was a total failure. The ship was the Norma, which was named after one of Kleinschmidt's daughters. That ship, after it failed to do what he wanted to, was taken down through Hell's Canyon to Lewiston by Captain Gray, and that's a whole story that's kind of a nail-biter. It was a real challenge to get that ship down through the Snake River, and it didn't make it unscathed. There were several times when it hit rocks and it tore it up and had to be repaired, and it almost didn't make it, but Captain Gray did get it down to Lewiston, and then it was used up and down the Columbia River for a number of years until it was finally scrapped. Because the Norma was too big to make it up the Snake River, Kleinschmidt had another smaller steamship made called the Mabel, which I think was named after another of his daughters. It was maybe half the size of the Norma, but for some reason it also failed, and that plan was abandoned as well. The first town in the Seven Devils was right by the Peacock Mine, and you can't see it very well, but here's that little branch of Copper Creek. Helena was on the west side of that little branch. So the original Kleinschmidt Road went from Helena and the Peacock Mine up to the top of this ridge where the modern road goes, and like I said, the modern road is basically on the same route that Kleinschmidt's original road went, and went down to the Snake River. So Helena, being the first town, was platted originally as the town of Seven Devils. You can see how the streets were planned out and lots were going to be sold, and then at some point it changed into plat of Helena town site, and same streets, same layout. Here's how Helena was actually laid out. You know, the plat showed those neat streets laid out in squares, but cabins and other buildings were built just kind of haphazardly along the road. This is kind of interesting to me. This says original road here and present road. This, I don't know what the date is on this Forest Service map. It may have been in the 1970s. It's hard to say. It shows where the cabins were, a trash pile. Actually, there were trash piles behind every cabin. When I was in there right after the Eagle Bar fire, you could see the outline of every cabin, and there was a pile of tin cans behind every cabin. You can see here it says Peacock approximately 600 meters this way. The Peacock Mine was over across here. This is a drone shot looking west down Copper Creek. This is basically the same view, only this is a drone shot from up higher and a little farther away. There's a little branch of Copper Creek that goes right up through here, and Helena was right here. And you can see the buildings in this shot. Here's that little branch of Copper Creek. You can see a building here and there. You can also make out maybe this road that zigzags back and forth, switches back and forth, and goes up to the road that Kleinschmidt would build along this ridge top. This is the Peacock Mine. This is the main lower tunnel. This is the upper shaft. Today, Helena, the old site, is right in here, but in 1988, the Eagle Bar fire came through here and just decimated all this area, and this is new growth that came back, and it's so thick that I don't even think you can walk through there. It's just impenetrable. Just for reference, Sheep Rock is right out on this point, and as I said, a road goes to it along this ridge. If you've never been to Sheep Rock, you really should put it on your bucket list, because it's really an incredible view of Hell's Canyon. Probably the best view from the Idaho side that you can actually drive to. So here's a shot of Helena. Not sure what the date is. This is the Helena store and post office. This is Ferdinand Allers. He and his wife Hattie Allers ran the post office. In the 1920s, the Forest Service established a guard station at Helena, and Lambert and Aileen Darlin manned that guard station. The Darlin family would mine in the Seven Devils mining district around Cuprum clear up through the 60s. This is a building that was remaining at Helena sometime probably the 1960s. It's not clear when it was. Here's another shot of some of the buildings that were left there. This is looking more or less south at the Peacock Mine. Here's the main tunnel. Here's an upper shaft going down. There's a hoist up here, and in a minute I'm going to show you the hoist equipment that is still there today. Notice you can see the end of a cabin here is barely visible. This next shot is looking the opposite direction, looking north. Here's that cabin. This is a little different date because by now there's a ore cart rail going out here to a tailing pile. This is the steam boilers at the top of the hill above the main tunnel, up where that shaft was just below it, and that hoist. Steam boilers generated steam by a fire in here, and tubes went through a water jacket inside these, and the smoke and the heat went out the smokestack, but they went through the tubes in the water jacket and superheated the water into steam. The steam went into a steam piston like this, which turned a pitman arm that turned this wheel, which was geared to turn this drum here, which had a cable on it which would lower and lift a container of some kind, which brought ore up and down and men up and down the shaft that was here. This is the only time I've ever seen steam boilers encased in rock like this. I'm not sure what the idea was, maybe to enclose the heat a little bit. I don't really know. After the mines more or less played out, which was around 1916 to 1920, the county took back the Helena town site for back taxes. The taxes hadn't been paid in a while, and they sold the area there to Jake Wallace from New Meadows for $15. In 1988, the Eagle Bar fire wiped out any remaining structures or even every scrap of wood that was at Helena, so there's nothing left there today that isn't burnable. That fire was started at Eagle Bar, which is on the Snake River down over the hill, by a guy who used nature's facilities as a bathroom, which basically means there were no facilities, but after he used his toilet paper, he figured the appropriate thing to do was to burn his toilet paper, and when he did that, it caught some brush or dry grass on fire, and that fire just raged up over the hill. I'm not sure how many acres it destroyed, but it really raised havoc with the Helena town site and that whole area. This is Joe Brown. We know it's Joe Brown because we have a picture of him. Joe Brown was a well-known miner. He had mined down in the Waihe Mountains at Silver City in that area, and came up to the Seven Devils mining district. And in the fall of 1909, he disappeared. Nobody knew where he was, and they searched for him, and they didn't find him. But part of the story is that he had a mine in Devil's Hollow, which kind of sounds spooky, but to add to that element of the story, the 1905 Weezer Signal had a story that said, Joe Brown has struck a large body of ore just where a spiritual medium from California who was in this camp directed him to work. In other words, this medium spoke to the spirits, I suppose, and told Joe Brown where to find gold, and evidently he was successful. Joe didn't trust banks, and he kept his gold with him someplace all the time, and he was murdered and robbed, and his body was found in a tunnel in Devil's Hollow in August of 1910. We don't exactly know how much of him was found, but we still have his skull for some reason. I'm going to talk about Dr. William Brown, who was a prominent figure in the mining district. He was the only doctor, he was the coroner, he had a store in virtually every town in the mining district at one time. But anyway, Dr. Brown wound up with Joe Brown's skull. Dr. Brown's daughter, Winifred Brown, married Robert Lindsay, and they ran Starkey for a while, and I'll talk about that more in a little bit. Winifred had the theory that Joe Brown was actually accidentally shot. He used to carry a little sawed-off .22 rifle on a sling around his neck and around on his back, and she thought he accidentally shot himself, but we had a forensic scientist look at this skull. He verified that this is an entrance wound, and he also found where the bullet had hit the back of the skull. So he was very obviously murdered. Now, Dr. Brown's daughter, Winifred, in the 1940s was a high school teacher in council, and she used this skull as an anatomy lesson for her students. It still has a little bit of pencil writing on it and outlining parts of the skull. There's a little bit of writing here. Mostly it's been erased. Today this is in the Council Valley Museum on display in a mining tunnel that we made, and so it's one of our best and most interesting displays. So I'm going to talk now about the Blue Jacket Mine, which was one of the most prolific, most prominent mines in the Seven Devils Mining District. The Blue Jacket Mine was right here. To orient you to the location, here is Indian Creek. Cuprum is right here along the creek, and Landor was way up the Indian Creek here. There's a little branch of Indian Creek called Garnet Creek that goes right up here. The Blue Jacket Mine was right here on a very steep hillside. That was one of Albert Kleinschmidt's initial investments in the mining district. Here's a little closer view, a satellite view. Garnet Creek runs right down through here. This is north. The original Kleinschmidt Road that goes to the Peacock Mine is over here. The Blue Jacket Mine was on a very steep hillside right here. This is a picture of some of the buildings and the workings at the mine. And I think it's interesting that this log cribbing right here is visible in this next photograph, and I'm assuming maybe this is earlier, before that other structure was built. And here's the main mine tunnel opening to the mine. There's some kind of little building, log building right next to it. This next picture was taken from close to the same spot, but by then there's a ore cart track running out this way, and there's a steam boiler being installed. Here's a closer view of the guys working to install that steam boiler. Why it's there, what function it performed, I don't know, and I have never figured out how these guys back in those days before heavy equipment, how they got these things that weighed multiple tons off of a train car, onto a wagon, off of the wagon, and installed it wherever they were going to put it on these steep mountainsides. They must have had some tricks, like they're using a lever here, but you know, that's not enough to lift this thing. So they had some kind of methods of moving these things, and I don't know. It's pretty amazing that they could do what they did. This is a view looking north down Garnet Creek. Well, it's looking up Garnet Creek. The Blue Jacket Mine was up here on this hillside, and there was a road from the original Kleinschmidt Road that came right along here up above. This was sometimes called Garnet City because it was on Garnet Creek, and it was also called Blue Jacket Camp. It was kind of the headquarters for the Blue Jacket Mine. This building is going to appear in the next shot. And it's this building right here. This is looking more or less east. This is the Blue Jacket Mine office. It was a very nice building, a two-story building, and I'll show you another shot of it. Here's where it was in relation to other stuff. This is it. This is looking more or less north. Here's another winter view. This is what it looked like in the late 1980s. You could still walk up the stairs, although it was a little iffy. And today I really don't know what's left of it. I'm sure it's pretty well collapsed. Down the hill from the mine office was the cookhouse, and it looked like this. Today it looks more like this. This was taken a number of years ago, so it's probably rotted away even more. But this is the cookhouse. This is the mine office in the 80s, looking kind of northeast. This area, obviously in the old days when they were mining, was more open. It's pretty well brushed in now. This is just another view. This is the main road that came from the Kleinschmidt Road, came around here. The Helena mine was right on the edge of the road here and still is. This road, last time I was there, was very brushed in and not very smart to drive with a full-size pickup. You could probably get up it with a four-wheeler or something. And these roads change from year to year. Sometimes somebody will go in and open them up a little more. So I don't know what the condition of it is anymore. This is the Helena mine, which was right on the road and still is. The modern road is still right here, and this mine opening is right on the edge. I wanted to back up and show you the Blue Jacket Camp cookhouse again. This is where the employees were fed. And there's a tragic story that happened here in one of the winters around 1900 when the mine was in operation. There was a young man that worked there, and they had a fire going to cook the food and to heat the building. And there was a big pile of firewood out back here, out back of the building. And the young employee went out the back door to get some more wood for the fire, and after about 20 minutes, the people inside were wondering where this young guy had gone. He hadn't come back, and he should have been back inside quite a bit before that. And they went out the back door, and here was a big pile of wood with this young guy's hand sticking out from under the pile of wood, and he was dead. What he had done, instead of taking wood from the top of the pile, he had been for several days or weeks pulling wood out from under the snow-covered top of the pile and undermining it, and he finally took one piece too many and the whole thing fell on top of him. This is a topographical map kind of showing the layout of the Blue Jacket mine right here, the Helena mine, and this is a pretty good view of the road that went around to these mines. The Queen mine is right there. Garnet City, or Blue Jacket Camp, was right along in here. This road went over to the main Kleinschmidt Road. This road is the main road today and is drivable. Lockwood Saddle is right here. There were a few mining prospects right in here. This road goes over to Horse Mountain Lookout, which is on a knob out here. This road goes on to Sheep Rock and the Peacock Mine. This road, the last time I was up there, was barely even visible and not drivable at all, but somebody told me that now you can drive on it. As I said, it changes from year to year. People sometimes work on the road, so and probably because these mines are still owned by private owners. Most of this area that's shaded in here is probably composed of patented mine claims, which means they're privately owned. I should talk a little bit about the town of Decorah. Decorah actually came to be after the town of Cuprum was created. It didn't last very long. It was kind of a flash in the pan, but it was right at the mouth of Garnet Creek, where Garnet Creek entered Indian Creek, kind of on the north side of the mouth of that creek. Decorah was more of a, I guess you could call it a party town. I don't know if there were prostitutes there, but there was gambling and saloons, whereas Landor was created a little bit after Decorah, and it was more of a family town where people were a little more family oriented, and so that's the reputation Decorah had. The town of Landor was probably the biggest town in the Seven Devils mining district during the active days of mining. This is looking north, a little bit northwest. Indian Creek runs through here. Here's a shot looking west on the main street of Landor. The Arkansas Decorah mine is in the background. Actually, they were two different claims, the Arkansas claim and the Decorah claim, and that's how they spelled Arkansas for some reason. It's interesting that you can see ore tracks on supports coming out here where they were dumped onto these tailing piles. There's another one right there. So this is looking west. I'll show you several more shots. This is another shot looking west from a little farther back. The mines are still up in here. Today this whole hillside is just really thick trees. You can barely walk up through there with trees and brush that's hard to get through. Another view looking west, which was the most popular view to set a camera up for, obviously. Another shot looking west. This is a little farther to the west. The mines are up here. The road to Cuprum now goes over here. This would have gone down to Decorah and would have also gone up to the Blue Jacket mine. This is an interesting ore chute coming down to this cribbed area here, some kind of a place to store ore, evidently. Today there's a building, I don't think it's this building, that's a little farther to the south, but the roof is still there and the rotted logs are still underneath it. But this ore chute, here's another shot of it. They evidently loaded ore into the top of it and let it slide down to that ore crib. Just a shot of the Arkansas and Decorah mines. Like I said, this whole hillside is just really thickly brushed and timbered now. This guy is Thomas George Jones. I think he went by George Jones. He's the guy that basically started Landor and was kind of a character. There are quite a few stories about him. Here's that ore crib again and the slide, the chute that went down to it. About 5 years after the town was started, the Ladd Metals Company built a smelter. It was one of two smelters that were built in the Seven Devils mining district. You can see it's quite a setup. It looks like there's a road coming up here to dump ore up above it and work it down into the smelter. It's interesting to me that this smokestack looks round, and the chimney that was there in later years was square, made of brick. So I don't know how to reconcile those two things. And here's a ridiculous idea that, you know, you run into some really ambitious plans that people had back in these days, and some of them were so ridiculous. This was in 1904 when the smelter was first beginning or trying to begin operation, and the signal said that the smelter was built on the combination plan, part reverberatory and part blast furnace. A reverberatory furnace uses indirect heat to heat things to smelt, and a blast furnace uses direct heat right onto the ore, which is kind of beside the point. But what I'm talking about is the heat is supplied from a gas flame from a producer that generates the gas from the carbon of wet, rotten white fir wood mixed with oxygen and hydrogen at the proper moment. In other words, he was going to burn the gas given off by rotting white fir and burn that to smelt copper, which takes about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit to melt the copper out of the ore. It was just a crazy idea. But he was going to revolutionize the mining industry. So what they actually wound up doing was they tried to use charcoal, which, if you don't know what charcoal is, it's partially burned wood. And because the impurities are burned off and what is left burns hotter. That didn't work real well, so they finally started using coke, which is partially burned coal, the charcoal equivalent of coal. The impurities are burned off, and coke can generate a really hot heat to smelt the copper. However, it didn't work either. It was just impractical for some reason, and that smelter failed. You can see a lot of wood here in the foreground, a lot of logs. I'm assuming that maybe this was when they were trying to generate heat using wood. This is the chimney that was left at Landor for years afterward. It was there until I think around the 1990s, and I'm not sure if the owners of the property knocked it down for liability reasons or what happened, but this was a landmark there at Landor for years. I'm assuming it was where they smelted the ore, the actual furnace where they did it. This is a close-up of the opening there, and I think this is the 1920s when some people were exploring. For years, even after this chimney was knocked down, there was a big pile of bricks, and those bricks are all gone now. People have come in and carted them off, and I don't think you can find a single brick there anymore. This is looking more or less south down Indian Creek. Downtown Landor is over here. Arkansas Decorah mines are over here. This is Charlie Allen's sawmill. Charlie was Levi Allen's stepson, and he was quite a prominent figure in the mining district. He had this big sawmill. He also was the superintendent of several mines in the area, and was very well known. This is on the main street of Landor, looking more or less east, and this is Dr. William Brown's store. It was also the post office, his doctor's office. He was more or less an optometrist who sold glasses. This is Dr. Brown here, and these are his daughters Mildred and Winifred. This is a scale for weighing ore wagons. This is the Portland Trading Company, just a big supply store where people bought mining supplies and all kinds of things. This is the Seven Devils Standard newspaper office run by Ben Edlin. Ben only ran the Standard in Landor for a couple of years, I'm not sure how long, and when he left there he went to Meadows and started the Meadows Eagle newspaper. So that's how the Meadows Eagle got its start. This is a closer view. This is Dr. William Brown. Closer view of his store. It says Landor Post Office, drugs, cigars. Brown's store is what that says. Again, this is Dr. Brown and his wife and at least one of his daughters, either Mildred or Winifred. Dr. Brown first practiced at Salubria, and then he was hired by the Pacific and Idaho Northern Railroad, who had big plans to build a railroad into the Seven Devils mining district. Dr. Brown was hired to be a doctor at Cuprum to set up a hospital to take care of any injured workers that would have been injured building the rail line. They actually did build some railroad grade in various places between council and the mining district, but they never laid any rails or did any further construction at all. After living at and practicing at Cuprum, he moved to Decorah when it was started, and then when Decorah more or less faded, he moved to Landor and practiced there for several years until 1916, when he moved to council, practiced medicine there for a short time before he moved to Starkey Hot Springs, where he and one of the Kleinschmidt brothers went into business buying that hot springs. Later, Dr. Brown and his wife Emma owned it exclusively. They passed it on to their daughter Winifred and her husband Robert Lindsay, and they ran Starkey from the 20s on pretty much, I think, through the 60s. This is the Landor School, which was down Indian Creek a short distance. I'm not exactly how far. I suppose there's nothing left of it today. I've never pinpointed exactly where it was. This is an interesting map, just to orient you. This blue line here is Indian Creek. This is the main Kleinschmidt Road going up to Helena and the Peacock and Sheep Rock. This is the road that went around right under the Blue Jacket Mine, the Helena Mine, down here to Landor. It's interesting because this says P&IN Depot Grounds right here, and here's the railroad that they plan to build, and that curve right there is way sharper than any train could have made, but it's about as realistic as their whole plan, so what are you going to do? Decorah was right here at the mouth of Garnet Creek. Evidently there was a road going down Garnet Creek at one time, but I can't find any trace of it now. It may be there in a place or two. There's a ditch here that's labeled Water and Power Ditch, as if they were going to maybe generate some power. I'm not sure. This is Camp Creek, named after some of the Camp family that still live here today. This is a view looking east, maybe southeast, at Landor sometime after 1920, when it was, past its heyday and the town was pretty much gone. The south side, all the buildings there burned in 1916 when the postmaster went to sleep with a candle that he was using to read. The candle either fell over or burned down too far to function anymore, and caught the whole south side of the town on fire. The buildings on the north side are gone here. There are just a few buildings over here. I'm not sure what year this picture was taken. In the 1960s, there were still some foundations logs along here, kind of like that. So this could be, quite a bit after the 20s. I'm not sure. As I said, a fire destroyed the south side of town in 1916. The Browns moved to Council, and then Starkey. They left Landor in 1916, and by 1920, Landor was completely deserted. It was said that at one time between 5,000 and 6,000 people lived within a 7-mile radius of Landor. In other words, at Decorah, Cuprum, all the other towns, Helena, and we'll talk about Placer Basin and Black Lake and some of those in a little bit, but that's a lot of people in the Seven Devils Mining District. So after being deserted in 1920, in 1941 during the Second World War, there was quite a scrap iron drive going, where for the war effort people would salvage as much scrap iron as they could, and so the smelter at Landor was burned for scrap iron. Cuprum was probably the second town after Helena in the mining district. This picture was taken very early in the town's history. It seems like there were only a couple of buildings, and you can see there's stumps still in the main street there. This next picture is kind of looking the opposite way, down toward the other end of the street. You can see that these are the same two buildings. This has been added on, and then later on, looking back the other way again, this is now the Seven Devils Hotel and Bar, and the rest of these pictures pretty much show these same buildings on the left here. This is the 4th of July, not sure what year, probably around 1900. The town was started in 1897. It was a flat along Indian Creek where the freighters used to camp out, and then somebody started a store there, probably that building on the very left that turned into the hotel. And then a smelter was built there very early on, probably around 1898. And that smelter had great promise, according to the newspapers, but it was one of two smelters, along with the Landor smelter, that was built and failed miserably. So the mining district never did have a functioning smelter. I think the Landor smelter actually produced one great big copper bar that weighed a couple 100 pounds, but ultimately it failed. Here's a picture of Cuprum in 1900, pretty much the favorite view of photographers, evidently. These poles here are telephone poles and telephone lines. They didn't have power, but telephones reached into the farthest reaches of the mining district. Arthur Huntley was a ambitious rancher who came to the mining district in 1888. This was not too long after Albert Kleinschmidt arrived, but before Kleinschmidt had built his road. He established a ranch right here where today this road from Bear comes down and meets the Kleinschmidt Road. This became known as the Huntley Grade, this road from Bear. But again, it wasn't there when Huntley came here and established a cattle ranch. The Huntley Grade was built about 1890, a couple years after Huntley arrived, and it was an infamous road that the freighters just hated. It was narrow, it was windy, with sharp turns, and it was just a horrible road. You can still see it below the modern road down that Huntley Grade if you look in the right places. It's not very easy to see. This picture actually is not of the Huntley Grade, but I thought it was a good one to illustrate what it must have looked like. So the story behind this mansion is quite a story. In 1901 or so, Arthur Huntley at his cattle ranch employed some brothers named Caswell, and they had been exploring for gold, prospecting around the Thunder Mountain area over east of Long Valley. And it must have been around 1900 or 1901. In the fall, they discovered a gold deposit that they thought had real promise, but they were completely out of food, out of money, or any funds to keep going, and winter was coming, so they came back to their headquarters around the mining district area. They had some property down on Big Bar, and they may have wintered down there. But they worked part-time for Arthur Huntley on his cattle ranch. And the next spring, they came to Huntley and said, look, we really are out of money, but we know there's a big deposit of gold over there next to Thunder Mountain, and if you'll loan us $50 or so, we'll cut you in on whatever we find over there around Thunder Mountain. So Huntley loaned them $50, and they bought supplies and went back into the Thunder Mountain district and uncovered one of the biggest gold discoveries in Idaho. And they all became fabulously rich. So this is the mansion that Huntley built with his money. It was 3 stories, had electric lights that he ran with a generator in Indian Creek. And then in 1904, he knew a school teacher over at Cove, Oregon, where he had taken cattle to sell one time, and met her, and he persuaded her to marry him, and they moved into this mansion. And by this time, of course, the road from Bear had been built, the Kleinschmidt Road had been built, and there was a lot of traffic right through their place at that junction. They went into business raising purebred Hereford cattle, and he sold them all over the country. Incidentally, this is looking more or less south, and the road today comes to the junction with the road to Cuprum right over here. The road goes south to what we think of as the Kleinschmidt Grade, and then north to Cuprum. And there is a little house there today, but the mansion is gone. This is looking north. The house is back behind the barn there. Indian Creek is over on the right. This was a 3-story barn. It had electric lights and running water, and it was just kind of a marvelous barn for its era, or any era actually. This wing of the barn disappeared years before this part did. This part was standing there probably into the 1990s, maybe even past 2000, but today it's nothing but the concrete foundation, and the whole thing has collapsed onto the foundation, and there's beams and boards and stuff rotting away there. This is looking north at the mansion, has a nice fence around it. The barn would have been over to the right of the camera. So after the First World War, the agricultural depression that hit the country affected Arthur Huntley and his wife Pearl, and they lost a lot of money. He may have invested in some mines and a sawmill or two and didn't do well, and his fortune ebbed to the point where he finally just gave up and sold out, and they moved away. A couple of people owned this ranch before a family named Spiropoulos, who ran sheep, bought it in 1929. 5 years later, in 1934, they were remodeling the house, and the house caught fire and burned down. And shortly after that, the Spiropouloses rebuilt this house on the same spot as the old Huntley mansion. This shot is looking south down Indian Creek. At some point, the Spiropouloses' oldest child, Mary Spiropoulos, married Ted Bokitas, and their son, Nick Bokitas, who is a Weiser attorney, owns that property today in 2025 and has a nice big house, which is up on the hill across the road to the right here. This is Arthur Frenchie David and his daughter Elizabeth, always called Lizzie. Frenchie's wife was judged insane right after Elizabeth was born, and she was sent off to the asylum in Blackfoot, and I don't think she ever returned. I think she died there. His house was up the road from Bear. Huckleberry Campground is right here. You turn up the road that goes to Black Lake, and there's a flat right there that looks like this, and that's where Frenchie's house was, and he had a gold mine right close by there. Elizabeth grew up partly living here and spent a lot of her growing up years at private Catholic schools in Boise because because Frenchie could afford it with his gold mines. But over the years, he, for some reason, lost a lot of money and wasn't doing well monetarily, and his health had gone downhill. In 1922, Elizabeth was staying there with him, and he had an asthma attack, and he couldn't breathe, and Lizzie ran for help. I don't know where she expected to find help. I don't suppose there was a doctor close by. But while she was gone, he took a double-barreled shotgun and had a stick whittled that he could set off both triggers of the double-barreled shotgun at the same time. He stuck the barrel in his chest and killed himself. This is Placer Basin. This is in the 1930s. It was originally owned by the Ford brothers around 1900, just before they bought interest in the Black Lake gold claims. This was a gold mine. I'm not sure what it consisted of at the time, but when gold prices went up in the 1930s during the Depression, it was reworked. This structure was undoubtedly built then. This is the only inclined shaft that I know of in the mining district. This was a hoist up here that ran an ore cart down a set of tracks into an inclined shaft. In other words, the shaft went down underground at this same angle. There was also an ore mill here. This is from the other angle, showing the other part of the building. This may have been the ore mill, I'm not actually sure, but it was a ball mill that had a tank that rotated with steel balls about the size of a baseball that would rotate in that drum with the ore and break up the ore. So this is what it looked like all during the 50s and 60s. Just the framework of the hoist was standing there for years. I don't know if this was torn down for liability reasons, whether it fell over, whether it was burned, I really don't know. But after about the 1990s, it was gone. You can still see the concrete foundations of some of these things that are still there today. Placer Basin did produce some amount of gold. I don't know how successful it was, but their heyday was during the 30s when they hauled gold ore out of there in trucks. So if we go on up the road from Placer Basin past the Smith Mountain Lookout, the next place to the north is a gold mine at Black Lake. This is what it looked like in its heyday. This is where they had a store and a post office, probably in the same building. There was a mine above Black Lake, about 1,000 feet elevation higher than the lake. Simeon and Edwin Ford from Colorado bought these claims sometime around 1897. They built the road in there in 1900. This is the Summit Mine, which was up above the lake, 1,000 feet, as I said. This is another shot of the Summit Mine. This is probably looking northwest or west. A little hard to tell. You can't see the tramway here, but they did build a tramway that went almost 2 miles down to the ore mill that they built. The tramway went from the Summit Mine here, went to the edge of this cliff overlooking Black Lake. This is at the south end of the lake. This is one of the tram towers that was left there. It's pretty well fallen down today. But the tramway went across here. This next picture is kind of from a similar angle when the tramway was in operation. The cables went down over here to tramway towers. Their secondary mine was the Maid of Erin that went into this rock ridge here. There are some buildings here. This is looking kind of northwest, I think. This is looking back the opposite direction. This is the tram tower on the far side of the lake in that other picture. I located this tram tower base a few years ago. It's nothing but a bunch of rotted logs now, and I recorded the GPS location. So the tramway went in a straight line right onto this side of these buildings at the Maid of Erin mine. As I said, the tunnel went into this rocky ridge right here, and there were a couple more shafts or tunnels up above here. This picture is looking southeast. This is looking southwest, and I think those buildings were in here somewhere. It's a little hard to tell where the mine opening was, but so looking back toward the east, this is a tramway tower that's gone now. This building, the remains are still there, and it looks something like that today. It's a little more dilapidated. There's still a pile of stuff here, including parts of a tramway tower that was right here. The tramway went from the lake down through here to here, and the ore mill was almost a mile, I think, below the lake to this location. The tramway came down and the ore dumped into here. This distance here is only about 20 feet. It looks like these buildings are huge, but they must have been a lot smaller than it looks like in this picture. The ore would come down through these various levels into a cyanide vat where they would process the ore. This mine, or these mines rather, produced a lot of gold, and I'm not sure if they made much of a profit, but they did take quite a bit of gold out of there. This picture was probably taken after the mine was abandoned. I'm not sure what year it was. It was definitely before the Second World War, because all this was burned down for scrap iron. So this is a picture, a satellite shot of where the Summit Mine was, that one tram tower. The last one on the edge of the cliff here that I had a picture of is here. The tram went in a straight line over the lake to these tram towers here, to the Maid of Erin mine tunnels and buildings, on down the hill to the ore mill that's shown in that last picture. To get to the ore, where the ore mill was today, when you come into Black Lake on this main road, and there's a Forest Service campground right here. Before you get to the lake, back here, there's a little road that heads down the hill. It's kind of a poor road with water running down it a lot of the time. and the road ends right here. There's a four-wheeler trail past where the ore mill was. There's nothing much left here but a few bits of cable and anchors for some of the buildings on the cliff here, but there's really not much to see. And when you drive down in here, there's such a bunch of trees here now that you can't really see the cliff where the ore mill was unless you walk up the hill a little bit. This is a cable drum that's laying down on the hillside below the Summit mine. This is about 3 feet in diameter, something like that. It's a big cable drum. This is up by the Summit mine. This building is gone, or there may be a few rotted boards. It was part of a complex of buildings or one of several buildings. It's a little hard to tell. It may have been one of these buildings. In the 1960s, there were still remains of these buildings up there, kind of north of the Summit Mine Tunnel. Just rotted boards laying there in heaps. I think this is probably where the workers lived when the mine was active, which of course would only have been during the summer. In the winter, there would have been like 10 or 15 feet of snow here. The mine operated producing gold pretty well up until the First World War, when Germany was the primary source of cyanide. And after the war started, cyanide was really hard to get. Germany didn't feel like sharing it with potential enemies, and the U.S. of course turned out to be an enemy later. And it was a really hard blow in 1916 when Henry Sulzer was killed in a really bad car accident. Sulzer was one of the main economic supporters of the mine operation. He was a partner with the Ford brothers, and for some reason, when he was killed, there was some kind of legal status where there wasn't a clear owner of the mining claims and the mine equipment. So the Ford brothers just walked away and left everything in place. There were rooms full of canned goods and rope and cable and pipe just left in these buildings, and people came in and just hauled off tons of stuff. In 1917, some people came in and hauled off some mining equipment. In 1925, there was some equipment salvaged and taken over to places like the Iron Dike and Cornucopia mines for use over there. Like the smelter in Landor, this place was burned for scrap iron during the Second World War in 1942. This map shows Black Lake, the main road to it, the road down to the ore mill, the tramway. This road, as I said, you can't drive past here with a full-size vehicle. This four-wheeler trail goes around here into the headwaters of Rapid River, goes down into Paradise Creek, which is another tributary of Rapid River. And Iron Springs, which was another gold mining area, was right in here. Iron Springs was considered by historians as kind of a scam. It was never really a serious mining operation, although there was a little town there. It had power either from water power or some other kind of generator. This is a shot kind of looking north. This is a shot in winter. This, I'm not sure what this building is. It could have been a power generating station, or it could have been an attempt at processing ore. I'm not really sure what it was. There's a lot of wood stacked there. In 1937, a Harley-Davidson motorcycle club made a trip into Iron Springs, and a Harley-Davidson magazine featured an article about it, and featured these pictures of the group back at Iron Springs, and showed some of the buildings that were left. Here's another building. This is a Forest Service map of the way Iron Springs community was laid out. There's been a fire through there, and it's really hard to get up to where the mill, where the mine was. There are deadfalls and small trees and brush, and it's just a real job to get through there anymore. In the 1970s, there were still some buildings left, the remains of them. People used to go in there with motorcycles. This is a shot from 1986. Most of the buildings had collapsed. Like I said, there is a lot of snow there in the winter and a lot of weight on those buildings. And when I was in there a few years ago, there were just very few scraps of boards even left. There were a few pipes and things, harder material that hadn't rotted, but most of the wood stuff is completely gone. So on past Iron Springs, a trail goes up over Holbrook Saddle and down into another branch of Rapid River to a gold mining area called Rankin Mill. H.D. Rankin went in there and established a mine, and it was another one of those flash-in-the-pan operations that really didn't produce much of anything. I don't know if it was a scam or not, but Rankin was a dreamer who said he could manufacture nitric acid just using electricity, and could just draw nitric acid out of the atmosphere. Our atmosphere has a lot of nitrogen in the air. You know, there's a lot of oxygen and nitrogen, but he claimed he was going to revolutionize the mining industry by being able to just manufacture all kinds of nitric acid. Of course, it never happened, and that mine failed. It was actually consolidated with the Iron Springs operation at one point under one ownership. This is what Rankin Mill looked like as far as its layout. This is another Forest Service map from 1971 showing where the buildings were. Just south of where the mine was in the mining operation, there was a little community called Rand, and I think it actually had a post office briefly. It was named after the daughter of one of the people who lived there, maybe the postmaster, I'm not sure. But there was a cabin or two there. Rankin Mill was abandoned by 1903. I think it was established right around 1900, so it didn't last very long. This is one of the buildings that was there. That pretty well covers all the mines and towns in the Seven Devils mining district. They all had their ups and downs over the years. The market would fluctuate from year to year, but the main thing that caused every mining venture in the Seven Devils mining district to go under was the transportation costs were really high. But what really killed the mining industry in this district was the rock salad that I referred to earlier. Here's what happened almost every year. A mining company would come into the district and invest massive amounts of money into infrastructure, hiring people, building all kinds of things, and they would tear into a mountain with a tunnel, and they would mine this rich copper ore. But the copper deposits in the Seven Devils mining district were different than those in Montana. In Montana, the copper veins were continuous. They could start mining on a vein and just follow it for months and never run out of copper ore. In the Seven Devils, because it was such a rock salad, they would start a tunnel into an area of rich ore, but then that pocket of ore would end, and there was no way to tell where the next pocket would be. It could be up, down, north, west, east. There was no way to tell. So almost every year a mining company would invest in all this infrastructure, and then they just couldn't successfully mine the ore. That plus the transportation costs just killed every company almost every year. By 1916, investment in the mining district had pretty much slowed to a halt. By 1920, the area was pretty well deserted, except for Cuprum. It continued to be a community and still is today, with a small number of year-round residents. But the game wasn't quite over. In the late 1920s, another company decided to try to mine copper in the mining district. In 1927, there was a copper mine down here, way down Deep Creek, that was opened up. This is taken from up in Deep Creek looking more or less west, maybe a little northwest. These orange rusty colored rocks here are where the name Red Ledge came from. The iron in the rocks has rusted on the surface and they look rusty, so that's where the name Red Ledge came from. It was a copper mine. The company built a road from Eagle Bar. This is Eagle Bar. Hell's Canyon Dam is just down the river here. Eagle Bar is where the Eagle Bar fire started, or right in this area when the guy burned his toilet paper. This road that they built goes right up here, switches back and forth a little bit, and comes around and summits up in this area. And just look at this road. It is so narrow and the drop-off is so abrupt, it's hard to believe you could drive a truck over that thing, but they did. They hauled heavy equipment in there. They brought things like this big diesel engine in. All this was done in 1927. This teamster had looks like 6 horses on the front, and he also had 6 horses in back pushing. This is down by Eagle Bar just as they were starting up the road. The road goes up over this ridge and down the other side into Deep Creek. It's quite a few miles, and it's quite a hike. This is another shot of that same diesel engine going up the road. The road looks pretty wide here, but believe me, it gets really narrow. It's maybe 8 feet wide at the widest, and it's a horrible road. This is probably the same teamster bringing in a cable drum. This is from near the summit of that road looking down at Hell's Canyon Dam. It's a very steep drop off into there. This is that diesel engine after it was installed at the mine. I'm not sure what function it performed. It may have generated power. I'm not quite sure. This is a mucking machine. Because it was later in the era of mining in the Seven Devils mining district, they had more modern mucking machines, more modern drilling equipment. They had actually trucks instead of wagons. But they did a lot of exploration, a lot of drilling. This is inside one of the mine tunnels, but there was never any ore taken out of there. Cooley Butler was the owner of the mining company that owned the Red Ledge. He also at one time owned the Iron Dike mine across the Snake River in Oregon. In 1927, shortly after all this work was completed on the Red Ledge mine and the road, this guy, who called himself George Graham Rice, which wasn't his real name, was a con artist that started selling stock in the company that owned the Red Ledge mine. It was the Idaho Copper Company. He was caught doing it, but the case against him went through the courts from 1927 until it was finally resolved in 1935. And it stopped any mining in the mining district, and even over into Oregon where Cooley Butler owned mining properties. It just shut everything down because the courts were still trying to determine what was fraudulent and what wasn't. This guy, who called himself George Graham Rice, turned out to be one of the most prolific con artists in American history. He became known as the Jackal of Wall Street, and he was just an amazing con artist who could persuade anybody to buy anything practically. So he finally went to prison. The Red Ledge could have started operations again, but they didn't. They never shipped any ore, and in 1937 the machinery from the Red Ledge was moved over to Cooley Butler's property at the Iron Dike mine. Since that time there evidently has been some work done at the Red Ledge, because these buildings look a little newer than the 20s. This is a picture from 1972 looking down. This is looking west down Deep Creek. This picture was taken in 2018. This is Sean and Mendy Stanford from council. We took a hike down Deep Creek, down to the Red Ledge, and up over that horrible road to Eagle Bar. This is outside one of the tunnel openings where water was coming out, and it had so much iron in it that it formed terraces that would solidify. I read somewhere that this stuff would build up to the point in one of the tunnels that it completely closed off the tunnel opening. And I don't know why it forms these little terraces like this, but it's quite an interesting formation, this rusty water coming out of there. The Copper Cliff mine was just a short distance up the old Kleinschmidt Road from Cuprum. It was reopened and operated by the Silver King Mining Company from 1972 to 1994. It was originally a tunnel mine, an underground mine, and they opened it up into an open pit mine and operated there. Took quite a bit of copper out during that period. This is just a kind of a fanciful drawing I did of the mining district. Here's Bear, here's the Huntley House, the Kleinschmidt grade, Kleinschmidt Road going up past Cuprum. The Kleinschmidt Road went up here to Lockwood Saddle and on up to Kenny Point, Sheep Rock. The Red Ledge mine was down in Deep Creek. Here's Landor up toward the head of Indian Creek. Here's the road that was built in 1900 as a shorter route to Bear and Council to haul ore wagons. I should point out that before 1910, freighters from these mines in here had to go 3 miles up this road, 3 miles back down to here, down here to the Huntley place, up the Huntley grade to Bear, and then on to Council. There was no road between this point where the Kleinschmidt Road took off from the modern road. This little stretch here for 10 years was not built until 1910. And the freighters and all traffic had to go 3 miles up here, 3 miles back until they built that road. However, in 1900, this road was built, which made it a lot shorter for the ore wagons and travel to Landor. And so maybe that's why they didn't build this road, because they had an alternative. So this is where the road takes off the Black Lake. Huckleberry Campground is right in here. This is the Shelton Stage Station. Frenchie David's house was on a little flat right here. Up here is where the Black Lake Road takes off, goes past Placer Basin, up past Smith Mountain, on up to Black Lake, and then on into Iron Springs, and on back to Rankin Mill. And this is the Seven Devils Mountains back here. I just thought I'd backtrack a little bit. This is on the road to Sheep Rock and the Peacock Mine. This is looking southeast from the road. Over the hill is Indian Creek and Landor and Cuprum on down over here. This is what remains of the railroad grade that was built when they were planning to build a railroad into Helena and the Peacock Mine. You can still see it. It's very plain on the hillside. This is White Monument, this whole ridge here, and there were mining claims up there. In fact, Levi Allen actually filed a claim on that ridge very early on. This outcropping up here is made of marble. It's a kind of a granular form of marble. When I was here, I flew my drone up here and took this shot looking west. This is that marble outcropping that gives the ridge its name. This is Indian Creek right here. This is Smith Mountain, obviously. This hill right here is just super steep, and the road is right down at the bottom here, and pieces of marble frequently roll down the hill into the road. You can find it laying there. So this is my book, The Seven Devils Mining Camps. Everything I've talked about in here in this talk is in this book. It is for sale. And I also have a historical driving tour. This is remarkable technology. It uses your smartphone. You download a free app, and then I'm charging $10 to download the actual tour, which takes most of a day. What it does is when you reach a point, your GPS sensor in your phone automatically starts me talking about what happened at that location, and displays a picture of that location in many cases, including Albert Towsley's cabin along the road to Helena and the Peacock Mine. So it's a full day of very interesting history, and it's amazing technology. So if you want a copy of it, you can certainly buy one.